Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our webinar introducing the animal food industry sustainability toolkit. IFEEDER has been working on this project with the Context Network for the last year and a half now with many of your peers in the animal food industry. And so we're really excited. We launched this last week at IPPE, and we're excited to take a little bit deeper dive into this today. For some of you, you joined me last week at IPPE for the tech talk that I gave. So some of these slides will be familiar, but we're also going to take a deeper dive into the tool today. So if you're on and you saw it at the tech talk, you should get a few more items out of the talk today as well. So with that, let me get started. So just a quick introduction to IFEEDER if you don't know who we are. So IFEEDER is the Institute for Feed Education and Research. We're focused on advancing the understanding and trust in the sustainable feed and pet food supply chain through timely research and education. And so with this effort, the toolkit is going to be one of the pieces that we expect to continue to expand and bring to the industry as a valuable resource in this space. Just as a little bit of background, one of the things that we did as part of our sustainability roadmap work, and so I guess I should make that little bit of a clarity here. We worked on the sustainability roadmap, and as a result of that, created the toolkit. So the sustainability roadmap effort that we had underway was really about gathering a lot of background information, assessing the landscape, and figuring out how we could provide resources to the industry. And so the toolkit is a piece of that. And we'll provide more information about the sustainability roadmap itself and our phase 2 work in the coming weeks. But just for now, let me give you some background in the sustainability space for the feed industry and the pet food industry, and why we focused our efforts here and what led us to the toolkit. So as part of our efforts, we took advantage of some survey work that AFIA was doing this year. And within that space, we asked members, one of the questions was, what's the importance of sustainability to your own organization? And so out of about 276 responses from all across the animal food sector, 80+% of respondents indicated it was either important or very important to them. So this kind of helped us better understand the importance of sustainability to the animal food industry and the need for us to provide some resources in that space. When you look at the corporate commitments and what's driving our need to engage in the sustainability space, a lot of it has to do with the downstream supply chain. So as you all know, but I'm showing again here, there are a lot of consumer product goods companies or downstream customers of us that are placing goals and targets around net zero and carbon neutral anywhere from the next 10 to 30 years out. And so if you just look at the top piece of that line, that's a sampling of some of the corporate commitments that are very relevant to the animal ag space. Because of those corporate commitments towards zero or net zero, it requires them to assess their upstream, so the folks that they're sourcing their products for, and likewise further upstream, to assess the footprint of those potential stakeholders in their supply chain, so that they can understand their real footprint and understand how they can potentially reduce that footprint and work towards that net zero and carbon neutral goal. The other thing that's really driving the corporate space and the corporate work in the sustainability world is the number of investing strategies that are using sustainability as some element of their consideration. So essentially, if you're thinking about, if you're like a BlackRock, or maybe you're in charge of the California pension plan, those entities are making their decisions on where to invest based on the kind of sustainability reporting of many of the entities that they could potentially place funds with. And so as they look at indexes like GRI, which is the Global Reporting Index, or CDP, which is a corporate disclosure method. Those folks are tracking, if you will, the sustainability or the indexes for sustainability for many of our corporations globally. And in that space, it's been recognized that the higher somebody scores in the sustainability space, the lower risk investment they are. And so because of that, you see this, as the data shows, a 42% increase in the over the last few years in the amount of investing strategies that are focusing on sustainability. And so that's also driving what's happening in the sustainability space. But why focus specifically on feed? So to understand why we're focused specifically on feed, you have to understand a little bit of the lingo, and that is that Scope 3 emissions, which are all of the emissions that are indirectly tied to somebody in the value chain. So Scope 1 emissions would be those that are direct emissions within the boundary of an entity's operations. Scope 2 emissions are those that are tied to any of the energy that's used within that system, or heating and cooling that organization uses. And then Scope 3 is everything that's either downstream or upstream of that's outside of their control. And so when you look at Scope 3 emissions for food manufacturers in particular, generally 90 to 95% comes from things outside of their control, or Scope 3 emissions. Specific to animal feed in the protein space, Scope 3 emissions are feed is a very significant component of Scope 3 emissions. So when we look at the footprint of animal production, feed can be anything from 40 to 80% of the emissions or the footprint that's linked to that animal's life cycle or production. And so that's why in recent years, there's been a growing focus on feed and the footprint that feed has and how we can reduce that. I also, just thinking about feed, wanted to give you some ideas maybe of how some of our protein partners are thinking about feed and what it is they're seeking from us. And so as a part of the work that IFEEDER did with the context work, and quite honestly, this one with the work that we did with World Wildlife Fund when we hosted the Feed System Sustainability Summit last September, leading up to that summit, we and WWF and IFEEDER co-hosted a series of webinars in the sustainability space. And so one of the webinars was on LCAs, and one of the webinar speakers was Erica Lane from Iowa Select Farm. And what she said is that they really have an opportunity within sustainability to show that they produce a more sustainable product than others, a lower footprint product than others. They want to be able to capitalize on the interest that their stakeholders have in this space. And so they've undertaken an effort to do an LCA of their whole production system footprint. And in doing that, what they realized is that they need better data to be able to move from kind of this really broad kind of average secondary data. They need some more specific data. They want to move towards primary data. And they realize that if they could have better data, a better understanding of the footprint of the feeds that they're sourcing, they believe they could have a 40% increase or improvement, I should say a 40% reduction in the size of their footprint. And so feed to them is really important, and data around feed is really important to them reducing their footprint. Another example that we had from another one of these webinars would be MPS egg farms. And so MPS egg farms saw an opportunity to be able to feed chickens, their chickens, a low carbon grain, and then that would allow them to work towards a lower carbon egg. So MPS egg farms started working with FBN and their gradable system to be able to source grain that was produced with a lower footprint or a lower carbon intensity score to be able to track that data through their feed mill and then onto the rations that they were providing their animals, so that they can document and show their customers that they have a lower carbon product. And again, feed and I would say sustainably sourced feed and the ability to track that feed through the system is a very important element to them being able to do that. Another speaker that we heard from in those webinars was Kendra Levine at McDonald's, and she was very clear in what it was that she felt that McDonald's needed from feed to be able to work on their footprint. And so they wanted to see feed that was produced on land that was not newly converted from native habitat. So in perhaps areas of the US or Canada, they're speaking about land that sometimes gets converted from native prairie into crop production systems. So in South America, it would be, where they're more thinking about conversion of the Amazon rainforest into crop production systems. So they want to see feed that's not produced on newly converted land. They want to see production practices feedstuff production practices that are using climate smart practices or regenerative ag practices or in practices that involve soil health. You could put any of those words in that space. They want to see feed additives used for enteric emission, but not just on feedlots or for confined animal. They're very interested in the grazing animal as well. As we all know, especially in beef cattle, a significant piece of the animal's life is in a grazing system. And so there is a significant opportunity to be able to reduce those emissions from grazing animals. So they're interested in that. They'd like to see crop varieties that are grown and used with fewer inputs, but greater nutritional values. So that could mean genetically modified crops that have a greater protein content, for example, and require fewer nutrient inputs. So you get a greater value out of a reduced footprint. And then finally, data flow is really important to them. So the ability to be able to track all of those things through the system. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Matt Sutton-Vermillion. He's the partner at Context Network. Some of you have probably seen Matt on webinars with us before. He and his team have been instrumental in the work that we did for the sustainability roadmap and the creation of the toolkit. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give a little insight also into the background that drove us in this direction.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for the 100+ participants in the webinar. As Laura mentioned, there was some great research that AFIA has conducted around it, some great research that Dr. Kim Stackhouse-Lawson and her team at CSU Ag Next has performed regarding this. And during the work project that we've been privileged to work with you on, we identified and engaged with members of the feed supply chain, as well as upstream and downstream players, to gain insights from them. And all of that has come into tools that have been adapted and developed and are now available in the toolkit. And so we appreciate the collaboration that you guys have had. The intention of this toolkit is to make it easier for everybody, regardless of where you are in your journey, but easier and better alignment in the industry. So there's coordination, there's cooperation at an appropriate level to advance the trust in the industry, and that comes through because of these drivers that are out there, and the drivers of risk that are associated with downstream brands and upstream brands, as well as the desire for transparency and trust, not just from shareholders, but also from other stakeholders and brands that are involved. So we put these tools together, make it easy, and there's layers, as you can see within this, that help you understand those drivers that are behind it and how it might relate to your brand. You would be able to take a look and see how this sets up and is relevant to you and your brand and your organization. Next slide, please. So within the groups that we discussed, 96% of the organizations expect to continue advancing their sustainability journey. Now, some of the organizations, the current state is that they're just beginning or have yet to begin their journey, and others are incredibly advanced and following GRI reporting standards or SASB, or even looking at the international financial reporting systems expectations of the blending of those two frameworks. So there's just, it's very difficult to then think about how we build that toolkit for all, but through the great interface that we've had with you and the feedback that we've had in adapting these tools, there's a space for everyone around this. And the key is that you're getting towards that progress. It's a time-old tale, but it's a journey. It's not a destination, it's a journey, and it keeps on moving and shifting depending on the expectations of your investors, your capital resources, your customers, and your customers' customers as we go. So you'll find tools in here that are easy for you to understand and to be able to share internally to get alignment and make it easier for you to adapt to your systems. Go ahead, please.
Great. So just an introduction to the work that we did. Thanks so much, Matt, for those. And Matt will have some more insights into the toolkit as we continue through the presentation. So I mentioned the sustainability roadmap at the beginning. We had a collection of 23 entities that helped with funding in the sustainability roadmap project, as we call it collectively. And we use those funders to create an advisory committee. What's really important to me when you look at the entities included here is that it's not just our publicly traded multinational companies who tend to have sustainability teams in place because they've had to for all of the reporting requirements that they have for their own boards and for their own engagement as a publicly traded company. But we also have many of our advisory committee members that come from entities that don't quite have a sustainability effort in place and are just starting to figure out what they're going to do in that space. And so it was really valuable for us to have that mix of perspectives as we engage in this space so that we could create something that was valuable to all members of the animal food industry. One of the first questions that we received from the IFEEDER Board of Directors and the AFIA Board of Directors when we brought this project to them was, but how do you define sustainability? How are you defining sustainability for the animal food industry? Matt and his team shared with us that there are over 500 definitions out there of what sustainability is. So how do we even wade into that space? And where we came to was that sustainability really is an individual organization's journey, and it's not for us to define it for every member of the animal food industry. Instead, we defined it in a way that hopefully provides guidance to the animal food industry as they develop and pursue their own definitions and own work in this space. And so sustainability in the animal food industry for us is defined and managed by each individual organization to deliver measurable, continuous improvements on the impacts related to people, planet, and governance that are most important to them and their stakeholders. So the key things you should see in that: one, people, planet, and governance as a focus. So that would be in line with many of the other sustainability, I would say, platforms. Sometimes you hear that as ESG, or environmental social governance. So basically, we're talking about the 3 pillars of sustainability. Also important to sustainability, as Matt said, is there is no destination, it's a journey. So it's really about continuous improvement, no matter where you are, that you're striving to make improvements relative to any of the areas that you've identified as important to your organization. And also that they're measurable. So measurable meaning we know that we can't improve something that we don't name and that we don't measure. And so it's important that measuring is a part of sustainability as well. I would also say that in some of the conversations that I've had, sustainability and the items that you identify as priorities, we would call those, kind of material issues or doing a materiality assessment. But the items that you identify as material or important to your organization are going to vary. So if you're an ingredient manufacturer, they're going to be different than if you're somebody who's in the logistics space, in just the kind of transportation, storage, and handling of ingredients. And so don't feel like sustainability in the animal food space or sustainability within the animal food value chain, isn't necessarily for you because of where you sit within your organization. There's always something that you can do to manage your risk, reduce, work on an issue that you find important to you. It could be labor, it could be transportation, it could be your energy bill, and it could be something related to the information that's important to our downstream food members. So anyways, we have a broad definition. It's intended to have some key elements that folks can use in their own journeys as they pursue their own effort. This is a slide that many of you have probably seen us use in one way or another before. One of the first things that we did in our efforts in the sustainability space was define who we see as the full value chain and define who we see as the animal feed and pet food sector. And so that allowed us to say, where are we strategically focused and who is influencing our strategy and who do we need to be able to collaborate with? So you've heard us use the term upstream and downstream. So just for clarity here, so folks that are upstream of the animal food sector would be commodity crop producers or input companies. Folks who would be downstream of the animal food sector would be closest to us, live animal production, food animal processing, and then retail and distribution and the CPG companies that are facing consumers. Within the animal food sector, so specifically as we talk about the toolkit and who the toolkit was defined for or designed for, it's the feed and grain oilseed processing, feed milling and manufacturing, feed ingredient, whether that's nutrition or health and performance, feed manufacturing equipment, the pet food industry, as well as, very important in the sustainability discussion, rendering co-products and byproducts. As part of our effort to gather information on where IFEEDER goes with its phase 2 work in the sustainability space, which is the work we plan to undertake in 2023, we wanted to better understand what it was that our industry members and stakeholders needed from us and what were the drivers and their current challenges in the sustainability space. And so we undertook a quantitative survey, and we followed that up with a set of interviews with 20 individuals. And so this slide comes from those interviews. One, recognizing that this work was done in the June-July timeframe last year. So one of the first drivers you see mentioned there is investor and downstream expectations, and then also that international influence and market access. So those two items in particular, you see the SEC listed there. So that's the Securities and Exchange Commission, which of course governs what's happening with our publicly traded companies. And so in that space, they have a rule that they released for comment last summer. So it was on people's minds. We don't have AFIA submitted comments to that. We don't have feedback yet on the next iteration of that rule, but essentially why it was causing such a stir is that it will require, depending on what that rule looks like, publicly traded companies who are setting goals and targets relative to scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, in particular scope 3 emissions, that if they're setting goals and targets on those emissions, they have to be able to document the work that they're doing to meet those goals and objectives and targets that they're setting. And so that will require potentially collection of data from their scope 3 relevant suppliers. And so that could bring animal feed and pet food companies who maybe aren't publicly traded into the space of reporting because it will be a requirement for those publicly traded companies. Now, that's not to say that's going to happen yet. We haven't seen the next iteration of that rule, but that's why it shows up, because that was on the top of people's minds as that SEC rule came out last year. We also know there are drivers about customer demand. That has to do with either, if you're the pet food industry, it's direct to the pet food consumer. If it's in the protein sector, it's much more related to what our consumer product goods companies are seeking, as well as our protein peers. So we all know, dairy has their net zero dairy initiative. Last year, U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef announced a set of goals and indicators that they're tracking or pursuing relative to different segments of their industry. National Pork Board is pursuing a broader number of life cycle assessments being done on pork production systems and how to be able to lower that footprint as they gather those. And then poultry and egg also have a set of goals and targets that have many feed relevant items within them. So customer demand is a significant driver for us here. The need to have quality data and the ability to have transparency is also really important. And then relative to the EU and market access, the EU actually has a rule quite similar to the SEC, which goes into effect in 2024, and it will have an impact on folks in the Scope 3 space, so companies having to report in that space. We also ask about what the challenges were, and really it's those three items in the middle: resources to support sustainability, companies not knowing where to start, and understanding the business case for sustainability. Those three items are really what drove us to think about development of a toolkit for the industry. All right, we also want have it as a challenge, alignment across the value chain. So that's alignment across all of those actors that we showed on a previous slide. And then we know we have challenges with the ability to move data smoothly all the way through the system. So of course, that's a challenge as well. But it's those three middle items that drove us to develop the toolkit. And so with no further ado, we're going to dive in and take a little bit of a look at the Animal Food Industry Sustainability Toolkit. So the toolkit itself is broken up into 3 sections, but really 4 sections if you consider the introductory materials. So within the toolkit itself, you can access it on ifeeder.org. It'll take you eventually to the AFIA member page. So if you're an AFIA member company, you can have direct access through the toolkit. If you don't currently have a login, you can easily set that up. If you're not an AFIA member company, there is a pathway that links you to the AFIA publications page, and you can purchase it for download. Within the introduction, we take the opportunity to explain a little bit more about the sustainability roadmap project and how we got through to the toolkit. We also undertook through Iowa State University and Kurt Rosentrader's team development of a database, so doing a literature review on what's been happening in the animal food sustainability space right now in peer-reviewed literature. So that database is available. I think in particular of interest, we did a word map of some of the keywords that were in that space, and life cycle assessments showed up quite frequently. In fact, my count is that there are 24 LCA publications within that database. And so that's something that we're planning to further explore, but may be of interest to some member companies if you're interested in that space. And then you've likely heard Matt and I both use some terms today that we may have tried to not just list an acronym and spell out, but if you didn't catch what all those mean, we thought it was really important to include a glossary of terms. If you're not living and breathing the sustainability space every day, it's really helpful to have something to refer to and understand what GRI and SASB and CDP and scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions mean, as well as net zero or carbon neutral. All of those are definitions that we've included in that glossary of terms. So we indexed all of the resources within the toolkit to 3 areas. So we call it the crawl, walk, run scenario of getting started, making progress, and then reporting out on that progress and moving towards targets and goals. So each of the resources are indexed to one of the numbers 1 through 9 there. As we created those, it's not our intention that people use those in a chronological order, right? You don't have to use them as steps 1 through 9. In fact, we've heard from some of our companies in the advisory group that they're doing parts of all 3. And so not meant to be chronological per se, but if you are new to this space, crawl is definitely a good place to start and explore the walk items and see what's in the run space. But we needed a way to index them. And so that's how we have done it. And we hope you'll find those useful. So just a little deep dive into the crawl, walk, run space. We felt it was really important to provide some insights into getting buy-in from leadership, understanding what ROI justification or the business case could be, and then starting to create your own framework. So there are several items within that set of resources, from understanding kind of what the different definitions are or how you might start a definition, to exploring the business case, as well as a really nice set of best practices for working in the sustainability space that was created with input from our Feed System Sustainability Summit. So Matt, I'm going to let you take a little bit to take a deeper dive into one of the resources that we included.
Thanks, Laura. If we begin with the end in mind, and we think about a journey for an organization, experience has taught us that the best place to start is where you've come from. So when we think about an organization's vision, mission, and values, when a sustainability journey is grounded in them, it can then have the best shot of being embedded in that organization, so that when your people wake up, get out of bed, put their boots on, get to work, the sustainability activities that they're doing, that they have been doing for quite some time probably, become more real, because they are grounded in your values, your core values that help people understand the expectations of how they show up. They are grounded in your vision for what success looks like, and they can see themselves as part of that vision, and what they're doing is more than just showing up and getting a paycheck. It's related to that vision. And we saw demonstrated through this some great examples during the work that the Advisory Council and during the Sustainability Summit experience. It was really good. And so we've put some simple tools together to enable you to think about getting that strategic alignment first, grounding it with vision, mission, and values, and then taking steps towards execution so that it can be relatable and so that it can be sustainable in itself. And we don't have to overthink this. It can become, and it needs to become, just incredibly practical and part of how we work and get things done, and how we set expectations, monitor them, report them, reward them throughout the supply chains. Next slide, please. So when we think about these best practices that we've discussed along the journey, it must begin with alignment for leadership to have buy-in and set expectations and manage to those expectations. And it needs to align with that corporate culture. And the cleaner, the more clear, the more concise those expectations are, and the simplicity of the action plan and reporting in simple dashboard terms around, hey, here's how we are on this progress. This is where we're making progress. This is where we are ahead of schedule. This is where we're behind schedule. And so managing it just like any other project, whether it's through project management, through Kaizen, through continuous quality improvement, through Six Sigma, whatever your systems are that you have in place. But it's a disciplined approach that should be complementary to how you're getting business done today. And we need to be able to answer those simple questions of, why are we even doing this? And what does success look like for us? Success looks like our customers appreciate what we're doing. They continue to do business with us. They grow their business with us. They expand the opportunities for new product development. They help us get better at what we're doing. It's those kind of things and discussions that not only sales, but operations and finance and the whole team can wrap their arms around and really embrace. And And it's really important around who owns that sustainability strategy and plan internally, and that buy-in links into it from a leadership standpoint, and how we hold people accountable for it. So simple business practices, nothing really revolutionary, but that disciplined approach does pay off. Thank you.
So then within the walk section of the toolkit, we have an additional set of resources that focus on working to identify a customer's needs and expectations, how to engage across all of your team within your organization, and then starting to develop project plans that could be, your objectives or budgets and timelines in this space. And so within this set of resources, we have insights, and Matt's going to go into one of these in a moment, about, I used the term earlier about material issues, and you identify those material issues that you can use to develop KPIs or key performance indicators. Well, the way we get to those material issues is through a materiality assessment. And so there's information about a materiality assessment. There's information about, the background for the animal feed industry, and information about what others are doing in this space that's relevant to us, as well as a set of trends for the animal food industry that were alluded to earlier. In addition to that, there is additional information about what it is our protein peers want, what LCAs are. So you've heard us use that term life cycle assessment. What does that mean to you? And so there's, again, a variety of resources that live in this section. And so Matt, I'll let you take a little bit of a deeper dive into the materiality assessment space.
Thanks, Laura. In simple terms, materiality is just identifying what's important to your organization and your stakeholders. The work that we did identified a set of indicators, metrics, and the three pillars that Laura referenced before, and from a people, planet, and governance standpoint. So you could take that and use it if you wanted to begin your journey as a material set of indicators and metrics, or you could go into a nice bottom-up process of doing internal interviews, internal surveys, and full-blown external interviews and surveys that can be both quantitative and qualitative. It just depends on what fits with your culture, and we recognize that and provide some real simple tools that are practical, have been used by many, and can get you on your journey to where you want to go. But the key is it does not have to be complex. It does not have to be high cost, and it needs to be grounded in what's important to you and your organization. And that is why, going in reverse, thinking about it has to be grounded in your core values. It really, to be successful, has to be mission, vision driven around getting this stuff done, so that it's just part of your culture and part of who you are. And that's the simple side of complex. Next slide. So the tools that we're providing, and that your Sustainability Advisory Council have reviewed and helped us refine and adapt and make practical for you folks, get into that simple side of what is materiality. Why would you even conduct a materiality assessment, and how does that contribute to a company's sustainability journey? And you can go fast forward, and you can use the indicators and metrics, and you can even downsize those 16 indicators and metrics to just a few that are important to you, and really get into a crawl mode, but on things that are important to you as an organization and your customers. But from a process standpoint, it gets back into that simple process management side of it, or project management side of it. You define your purpose, you identify your topics that you're going to research, you assess those topics to make sure that when you are talking about the definitions, you are all on the same page of what the indicator is. In other words, what you are going to measure, and the metric or metrics that you are going to measure. And that means the functional units that you're going to be assessing those. And there's wide variance in what you can do. So you'll want to look at what's important to what others have done. And so you don't have to plow new ground, figuratively speaking. You can walk where other people have walked and done some great jobs. For example, Field to Market has done a fantastic job of setting up great science-based, practically oriented indicators and metrics that have a great universal acceptance around things. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on this stuff. So we think that there's a way that you can manage this very efficiently and get aligned and get moving together as an industry, and to not have to absorb a tremendous amount of costs. But then you can look at that matrix. You can look at it top down and go with something that is already existing, or you can do it from a bottom up approach and manage it accordingly. And the toolkit will give you a good set of guidance around how to get that done. Thanks, Laura.
And then finally, within the toolkit, we focus on reporting progress and setting goals. And so our main area here is really starting to think about how we communicate what value the animal food industry brings to our downstream stakeholders in our value chain, as well as to a whole host of stakeholders. It could be our employees. It could be our folks that we pursue capital from. It could be financial institutions, or it could be any one of our downstream stakeholders. And so we have a set of message maps that are available in that space, which will probably be interesting and useful to your sustainability teams as well as your communications and marketing folks. But in doing that, it's also really important that you understand the trends outside of the animal food industry and the trends of our downstream stakeholders and what's driving them so that you can better communicate. And so that's another resource that's available. And I'll let Matt speak a little bit to what some of those downstream customer trends are.
Thanks, Laura. The importance of measuring and common indicators and being engaged with upstream, as Laura pointed out in the beginning of this discussion, around the driving forces around this, so that we are comparing apples to apples, so that we are bringing trusted transparency into a discussion, and that we are recognizing where our confidence levels are in these situations. That's really, really important. And so engaging and understanding that you're going to adapt. Your customers many of them have set some bold goals that are incredibly audacious, and they're looking up at you and saying, how are we going to get there? You're part of 60% of our footprint. And it's not just about GHG, but it's about other things that are important to them. And so you think about how these things come together, and that the pressure and the discussions around what a good customer supplier relationship looks like and how that fits with your culture. And what we did was talk directly to these upstream and downstream players, and we discussed how those expectations are today and how they're likely to shift in the future, because it is not static. And that helped us enable us to bring a report together that you can look at it, you can see where you sit in the supply chain and how this relates to your role and responsibility. You don't have to take the whole thing on, but just being part of those conversations and understanding some of these pressure points and the expectations that are set for them enables you to have a healthier discussion around the value and the quality of the materials that you're providing, not just according to spec sheets, but according to what other demands are coming. Next slide, please. And so when we took a look at this, as Laura mentioned, the focus is upstream, because they're looking for, in the case of GHG, and meeting their commitments that are coming in 2030 or 2050, depending on which system they're looking at and how they're approaching it. That's where the footprint is. You go where the footprint is and where that is. And so that's why we're seeing that investment. That's why we're seeing the USDA investment, over $3 billion in the climate smart commodities projects that many of you are involved in. And so this discussion and this journey involves all of us around why agriculture, what our role is, what our opportunities for being a part of the solution and delivering on critical indicators, and how that whole supply chain comes together. whether that's carbon and how we think about offsets or insets, how we think about what progress is, what variance is that is natural in the system, and the upper and lower control limits, we're all going to discover, and we are discovering, really great insights that are going to be impacting how we move together. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, so much. I just noted in the chat and we'll speak to it here. This is the end of our presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left. Matt and I would be more than happy to take some of your questions if you have any in this space. Matt comes with a vast knowledge of working with a variety of animal protein and crop industry members and partners and organizations, and so has a lot that he can add to this conversation as well. And me from my time working in this space. So we'd be glad to take some questions. Before I do that, while you're thinking of some of those, I would remind you the toolkit materials are available at ifeeder.org. On there, you're gonna go. You can either go there directly from the homepage, or you can hit this drop down for areas of work, and you'll see sustainability and the sustainability toolkit. From there, if you're an AFIA member, it will take you into AFIA's members section, which if you're a member, you can access it immediately. And if not, if you're not an AFIA member, you can obtain it from the AFIA publications page to purchase for your organization's use. So that's available there. I also would remind folks that IFEEDER, the Institute for Feed Education and Research, is a nonprofit organization, and we developed this toolkit and all of the background work that we did for this effort and development of the toolkit and the sustainability roadmap with contributions from industry members. And so we, in the next couple of weeks, will be rolling out phase 2 of this work and looking for additional industry contributions to support the continued development of this work, especially as we move towards version 2.0 of the toolkit. So if you find this valuable, I'd love to hear from you on that and how you're using those materials, but we'd also love to talk to you about how you can help support the additional work in this space, which is so important and valuable to the industry. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, Matt, so we can see everybody and so that I can clearly see any questions that are coming in. I think, Kristen, you're looking at that space. The best way for us is to answer questions as they come in. So do we have any that we haven't covered so far? So I tried to go over how we access the toolkit. And it is on ifeeder.org, Vicki. Yeah, to get to it, if you go to ifeeder.org, it will take you to a link that is kind of behind the scenes part of the AFIA member website. So you want to get there through AFIA. Hey, Bill Northey, I see you've got a question. Glad to have you on. So your question, what are the most prominent animal pet food products marketing their sustainability today? What kind of consumer interest are they receiving? Seems like we know consumers will want sustainability, but will still need to pay for it at the end of the day. I think the most prominent one in my mind, and this is only because I got an invitation to their barn that we weren't able to go and see, is Kipster. So, you have an entity like Kipster Farms who has come into the United States and opened up in Indiana, and they are producing a carbon neutral egg. So they are creating those eggs with solar energy. They're feeding all co-product and byproduct diets and doing many other things to make them carbon neutral. Those, as I understand, eggs, when they come to market, will be available at Kroger. And I don't know, if you're in the Indiana area and in a Kroger, it'd be interesting to go and look at the price of those eggs and see what the uptake of those is. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, Bill's question, I like the way Bill thinks. And Bill, when you think about the consumer angle, there's a halo effect that most people are operating under, but that goes back to the brand and the brand risk mitigation associated with investor. So if we think about the animal side of it, the protein side of it, Smithfield Foods, JBS, National Beef, Prestige, all these organizations, not all, the vast majority of them have made a commitment to certain aspects of sustainability, not just carbon. And so that commitment for the brand is to demonstrate progress towards their goals that they've set. And that is where this MRV, the measurement, reporting, and verification, is coming into play. Most of the goals that were early on set for a 2030 threshold for delivery, the adaptation of this now is coming to a 2050 with most of the standards, whether it's the Science-Based Targets Initiative that has relationship with the carbon, the CDP that Laura mentioned earlier, the Carbon Disclosure Project piece. But that's the basis of it. We haven't seen a significant amount of the bell-shaped curve, that middle of the bell-shaped curve, for brand value demonstrated. But we have seen significant communication go into it. Nestle Purina has a significant commitment around their measurable reported progress in these areas. Mars, as a privately held company, has a significant commitment. Cargill, as an organization that is involved in many of these supply chains, has demonstrated great commitments and demonstrated progress in these areas. So those are just a couple top of mind things that come to mind for me. Thanks.
You have a quiet group today, Laura.
That's okay. Oh, we've got another question. What are the current pet food branding folks thinking of using insect protein to substitute the regular ones we used? Matt, do you have any insights into that? The only insights I have is there's a lot of research and a lot of traffic in press, right, about insects right now.
Yes, and there are several startups that have commercially scaled in North America as well as in other regions of the world, and that are scaling as part of their recycling program of key commodities. And what we have seen in research in this area is that it is very dependent on transportation and the quality of the characteristics and the ability of the specific insects that are being used, whether it's black soldier fly or others, that to transform that in a consistent and predictable and rapid manner. So it's a biological system, and then the quality of that in comparison and how that fits into the formulas related to the intake and the palatability and the nutritional characteristics of the diet come right into play. So you have a sustainability play on the front side, and then you get into LCFF, you get into least cost feed formulations that come into play, and then you have that niche of what percentage, just like any other ingredient source, what percentage of the diet does it need to play before it impacts things in a negative way. And from a cost standpoint, an intake standpoint, a nutritional value, and how that diet performs in the animal from metabolizable energy, net gain, all those factors. It just gets back into basic animal science again, just a different formula coming in. Instead of going through rendering and other processes, you're using a different technology up front. But we'll see how that plays.
Thanks, Matt. There's certainly a lot of movement in the space right now. We'll see how it goes with the consumers. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, thanks so much for joining us today. Again, you can get the materials at ifeeder.org. We will be sending out an email in the next day or two or early next week with a recording of the webinar as well as a set of slides. And I imagine the recording will also make its way onto the IFEEDER website. As you use the tool, again, please let me have give me some feedback. Would love to hear that feedback. You can reach out to me at lmoody@afia.org. As well, I anticipate IFEEDER will probably do some quarterly webinars across 2023 with additional insights into sustainability in the animal food industry space. So if you have topics you're interested in, again, please feel free to share those and we'll see what we can do. So we look forward to continuing to support the industry in this space. Matt, anything to add? You've got your hand raised.
Yeah, just one quick piece. It's really important to recognize and reiterate what you communicated before. IFEEDER and AFIA have done an incredible job of reaching out to the other work that's going on at the U.S. roundtables, at the commodity groups, to be a pivot point and a synergistic catalyst for this information to come together, to not to use resources much more efficiently and effectively. And that has been really received well so far from what we've heard. And so I think that's a real important piece of the next generation of work that you folks continue to do, is to use the resources, the limited resources, efficiently and effectively to continue this and advance it. So thanks again.
All right. Well, Matt, thanks so much. Again, thanks all of you for joining us. We look forward to continued engagement in this space. Great to see you all today. Bye.